Okay, you can still hear me, Jen?
Yep.
Okay, so you guys are my guinea pigs tonight because this is a program I put together 2 weeks ago when Donna and I just got back from our 7th visit to Big Bend National Park. I couldn't find anyone to do a program for June, so you're stuck with me. So I'm going to start with giving you some history of Big Bend. That's where it is located on the Texas map, Texas being an extremely large state to drive through, about 8 hours east to west and about the same north to south. So a little background on the Big Bend area of Southwest Texas. Back in the 1920s, the Texas State Parks Board was created to look into potential park sites throughout the state. And in 1933, they designated Texas Canyon State Park, which was in the Big Bend area. It was a mere 9,600 acres. It was near the Santa Elena, the Mariscal, and the Boquillas Canyons area. Shortly thereafter, they pulled in another 150,000 acres to add to that, and they changed it to the name to Big Bend State Park. Then in 1934, the National Parks Service got interested in this area, and they recommended that this site become a national park. In 1941, Congress approved an appropriation, think of this, guys, $1.5 million to purchase land at no more than $2 an acre for this park. By the end of 1943, those funds had been expended, but the bulk of the targeted acreage had been acquired, and the park was officially established on June 12th of 1944. Additional land was acquired near Boquillas Canyon and Castellon in 1947 and 1957, respectively. A lot of the ranchers that originally held land in the Big Bend area, they held out when the National Park Service first came a-calling because they felt that their land, especially most of it being along the river, was worth more than $2 an acre. And I kind of understand that. So Big Bend National Park currently encompasses 801,163 acres, or roughly 1,252 square miles. It's in the top 10 largest national parks in the lower 48. And prior to COVID, there were about 200 people that lived in Big Bend National Park, which included full-time park personnel, the Forever Resorts workers who run the concessions, the campgrounds, the hotel, the restaurant, employees of Big Bend Natural History Association, and volunteers. This is important to note only because the closest town of any size, is 73 plus miles. You've got Alpine, you've got Marathon, which is a teeny tiny town. Alpine's a little bit bigger, and then another 20 miles down the road, you've got Fort Davis. So it's that would be a long commute. So you can see the map here. As you could see, if you look, the brown is Big Bend National Park. The green is actually Big Bend Ranch State Park. So there's a significant chunk of preserved land in that part of Texas. But you can see going north along the roads just how far Alpine and Marathon and Fort Davis are. It is definitely one of the most remote national parks in the lower 48, and it definitely takes an effort to get to. But once you're there, it is definitely worth it. Donna and I have been there 7 times, and we just keep going back. We've been there, I think, twice. The first 2 times were in the dead of summer, not highly recommended, but that was the time we had off. And we've been there several times in the autumn, which can, if there's a little bit of rain happening off of the Gulf, that could be really, really nice, a little cooler temperatures. We've been fortunate in the fall to have some significant butterfly fallouts, if I may. And we've been there, I guess, 3 times in the spring. which is definitely a good time to go, but the timing has to be just right. There are three states that abut the park. You've got Texas in the US and 2 states in Mexico. And Big Bend marks the northernmost range of many plants and animals, including the Mexican long-nosed bat, which is one of 22 species of bats found in the park. The ranges of typically eastern and western species come together in this park. Many of the species are at their limits. The Rio Grande corridor is also a migration highway for species that travel through the deserts. So the ecotones, the transition areas between the ecological habitats, in this case, in this park, it's the river, the desert, and the mountains. It results in extremely diverse wildlife. There have been 78 species of mammals of 22 families recorded in Big Bend, and 12 species of amphibians and 60 species of reptiles have also been cited. So we're going to start off in the lower right. You see Rio Grande Village. So when you come down from, say, Marathon, you see Panther Junction. That is where the visitor center is. We're going to travel down about 20 miles, and we're going to work east to west in this case, starting from Rio Grande Village up to Panther Junction. Dugout Wells will stop out at, we'll hit the canyons down by Castellon. If you continue to the western part of the park, you get to Santa Elena Canyon. The eastern part of the park by Rio Grande Village is Boquillas Canyon. And then lastly, we'll head into the mountains. So there's a close-up of Rio Grande Village. Okay. So starting at the river. So the name Big Bend refers to that great southwest Texas U-turn, basically, that the Rio Grande makes in the area. It defines the park boundary for 118 miles. The river creates a ribbon of green that cuts through the Chihuahuan Desert. The river created canyons the park is known for. It also provides an oasis for species that aren't really adapted to desert conditions. So relative to the desert, the Rio Grande's floodplain, it's just a tiny little thin line of greenery. And you can kind of see that here. You see the mountains in the background. You do see that swath of green. The Rio Grande's floodplain is, small, but it provides habitat for a lot of species that you wouldn't necessarily expect to find in the desert. A good example of that is beaver. So what happens is, there's a lot of cottonwoods and willows that line the riverbanks, and the beaver will make its home in those areas in the bank, rather than making lodges like they do, in say New Jersey or more northerly areas. They actually burrow into the bank. And there are even shorebirds that occur here. There's a lot of sandy or sandbars, shall I say. So you can get killdeer, you can get some sandpipers. I always find it unusual as I'm hiking in these arid areas, a little further from the river, to hear killdeer, calling, but that's what happens. So this is the Rio Grande. And I should mention that the pictures here are taken from 2 trips. The one that we just returned from, we were there the beginning of May of this year. And there I found some challenges because, unfortunately, yes, I know it's the desert, but I didn't know that the desert even had been in a drought situation for the last 11 months. They have not had any measurable rain. Therefore, things were really crunchy and dry. And I was hoping to add a lot of butterfly images to this presentation. However, there were very few things blooming and hence very few butterflies flying. So yeah, this is a combination of 2 different trips. But we're down here by the Rio Grande, starting at Rio Grande Village, which is about 20 miles from the park visitor center. The village is a little community. It has 2 campgrounds, one that has full RV services, and there's camp store and picnic area. And very importantly, it's a little hub by the store for Wi-Fi, because basically once you get to this park, you're pretty much off the grid You are not going to get cell service hardly at all, or Wi-Fi. So the river, and this is actually a little holding pond here, but this is the river. The river can vary anywhere from 1 to 10 feet in depth. And it makes for an easy crossing of both animals and people. There is a small community right across the river here called Boquillas, Mexico, and it is a legal border crossing several days a week. At this point, it is open. If you wanted to cross the border, you'd have to go pretty far to the east to Del Rio or pretty far to the west to Presidio. But if you do cross into Boquillas, Mexico, you're basically in this teeny tiny little community that's about 1 block long, has some elderly guys living there. I did read that there is now a tiny little restaurant, and that's about it. And then it's probably 100 or so miles to the next community in Mexico. Along this area of the village, the Rio Grande Village, there's a nature trail. This is the picnic area. There is a nice profusion of some cottonwoods. So you can get some interesting bird species in this area and some other critters. So these are peccaries. This is in the picnic area, which is very close to the river. Peccaries are pretty common in Big Bend, as are Mexican cows. Some of the critters obviously do not know that there are rules for border crossings. And this Mexican cow, I think Dawn and I were camping we were camping down here a few years ago, and we woke up and I could hear cows. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, I'm in a national park. Why am I hearing cows? They don't belong here. And basically, like I said, they don't know that there's this thing called a border, and they just come over from Boquillas, Mexico, and do their cow thing, and then they go home. So there are a number of signs around to this effect, and there is a reason, because along the Boquillas Canyon Trail and in the picnic area here in Rio Grande Village, you often see things like this or other little knickknacks. Actually, the items here that you can see in the foreground that are little wire figurines, they've been pretty common for a number of decades down there. But technically, you are not supposed to buy any of these items off the blanket, off the rock, because there could be a significant fine and jail time. They do sell these items in the various visitor centers, and that's how you're supposed to get them. Doesn't always happen. So there are Mexican cows, there are Mexican trinkets, there are Mexican horses, there are Mexicans, and there is sort of an agreement and understanding that at least we were told this last 2 trips ago, that oftentimes the rangers at Big Bend National Park will once a week take some of the people living in Boquillas up to Fort Davis to get provisions, get supplies, because it is easier and closer for them to get supplies there than to try to get to the closest other town in Mexico. So this is not an uncommon sight. And this is a great birding area. This is a black vulture, very common down there, black vultures and turkey vultures with lunch. Greater roadrunners. This trip, we saw many greater roadrunners, sometimes only a couple, but this time we were hiking over at the park campground in Rio Grande Village, which is a very large campground with no services. And because as it gets hotter, they close off parts of the campground, there was a lot more area that did not have any people. And so it was easier to see some and photograph some of the critters, like this desert hare, multiple desert hares. And because you are down by the river, there are some dragonflies and damselflies. I should mention that if I have any of these, any of my species, especially my butterflies, incorrectly labeled, please correct me, unmute yourself if you're able to, or make a note for later to tell me. I am not any great, butterfly person. I mean, I'm trying to identify everything, but I'm sure I've made mistakes. So please let me know. I've had some help in identifying some of the species. This is a flame skimmer. This is still unidentified because I didn't take a male of the species, as I did not for this one. This one hopefully is a powdered dancer. Really pretty dragon damselfly, and a white belted ringtail. So especially along the Rio Grande and a few of the other more vegetated areas, you will see dragonflies and damselflies. This time in the desert, where I normally would see some species, again, it was crunchy dry and there was very little insect life flying. Okay, if you look carefully, you'll see a horned toad. And then let's look at some birds of this lower area that are not uncommon by the river. The black-throated sparrow, Paraloxia, beautiful bird, similar to our cardinal. How's that for color in the desert? Our vermilion flycatcher. And this is taken at dusk from the nature trail just at Rio Grande Village. This shows you the surrounding mountains. We had some nice alpenglow going on some of these evenings. This particular trip a few weeks ago, there was quite a bit of moisture coming in late in the afternoon. There were some storms blasting through, so I think that made a little bit of difference in the conditions for photography in the evening. We had an amazing lesser nighthawk show along the river the first night we were there and out walking, and that was really, really neat. These images were from 2014's trip. There were 7 of us that had gone down that year, and the deal is going out at night to see the critters. Dawn and I did that this year. Unfortunately, we saw nothing at night as opposed to the last trip. This is Texas toad, a banded gecko, a hand there for comparison. You get the idea of, just the size of that critter. Really blends into its background very nicely. This is a sulfugid in the arachnid family. Hopefully I got these right. Let's see, Texas long-nosed snake, I hope. A Kansas glossy snake. And a black-tailed rattlesnake. Again, those pictures were taken from 2014, but this year, the night that we were camping down by the river, traditionally we take a walk every night, and Don has his ultraviolet light. Actually, we both walk with ultraviolet lights, and we look for scorpions. So we're pretty lucky. We found about 25 Texas bark scorpions for the most part. Actually, we had 2 species, but this is Texas bark. So at this point, actually, when we leave the village, I'm going to give you a little background on some of the next few places that we're going to check out. When you leave the village, you start going west and you're traveling through what was a grassy desert, an area of very abundant grasses. This was the area that attracted a lot of the pioneer ranchers. They grazed horses and cattle, sheep and goats prior to this becoming a national park. Actually, there were over 90,000 head of livestock that had to be removed from the grasslands prior to 1934. And there are horses and cattle that are still raised in Boquillas. And like I said before, they don't necessarily respect the international border crossing rules. Big Bend can be excellent for birding. I'm going to mention this point, spring migration begins in late February and usually finishes around the first week of May. So we were maybe a tad late this time, but it was still fairly good. There have been over 450 species of birds found in the park. When we continue west from Rio Grande Village, one of the first places you get to after the turnoff for Boquillas Canyon, which is a little road that goes down 4 miles, goes into Boquillas Canyon. It's a wonderful trail to hike. If you're lucky, you might get serenaded by an illegal Mexican who has come over for the day to sing to you and have it echo through the canyon and hopefully make a few dollars for spending and then go back to Boquillas. But in dugout wells, that was, believe it or not, the cultural center of the Chisos. I mean, go figure. Since that was one of the few schoolhouses of the region was located here prior to the national park. The word dugout comes from the fact that the first homes that were built here were dug into the ground to form a dugout shelter. It's another really good birding stop. This is showing Santa Elena Canyon. So we've basically gone more to the western side of the park. Santa Elena Canyon is the second area that's easily accessible by a paved road, Boquillas being the second canyon area that you can get to. They're both worth going to. I just should caution you, if you're going to hike in either of those areas, you want to make sure you have plenty of water at the low, when hiking at the lower elevations, because it's just plain hot any time of year. So here is Santa Elena Canyon. This picture was taken in 2014. Please note the water. So if your eyes take you right down center where the walls of the canyon on the US and the Mexico side come together, you can just see that strip, that ribbon of water, which is the Rio Grande. Again, you can just see it there. That is our home away from home. That makes what we do very pleasurable. It's 1 year old and it has about 18,000 miles on it now. So we've done a little traveling during this COVID time. That is the Rio Grande River this year at Santa Elena Canyon. Basically, you can spit across it. Those are either foot or hoof prints, and you could see, based on the size of those prints, there is not a lot of water flowing in the Rio Grande at Santa Elena Canyon this year. That is 2014. That is this year. Same location. So I'm going to give you some background on the desert, because I think that's where we are visiting next. Yes. So we are in the Chihuahuan Desert in Big Bend National Park. It is one of 4 deserts that you find in the United States, the others being the Great Basin, the Mojave, and the Sonoran. The Chihuahuan Desert extends down into Mexico. Big Bend actually encompasses like the northern third of this desert. 3 sides of the desert are blocked by mountains, which sort of prevent rain. The 4th side is bordered by very large semi-arid plains. Chihuahuan Desert's a young desert. It's only about 8,000 years old. When it gets rainfall, such as it is, it comes mainly during monsoons, which are July through October. Although spring rains can occur, as I did mention, we missed out on one significant storm that was just to our east one late afternoon. We were told that it brought quarter-sized hail. So I'm really glad we missed out on that. The next day, we weren't as lucky, but the hail was only pea-sized. When it gets to the summer months, though, the ground temperatures in the desert can soar up to 180 degrees. So for the most part, critters stay hidden during the day so as not to fry. And then they become active, after the sun sets and it gets a bit cooler. Cooler is a relative term. This is the time when we like to take to the roads very slowly to get out and watch the desert coming alive, because you never know what's going to run, fly, or slither across. So this is one of the grasshopper species. This is a tarantula. We were told it was a little early to see tarantulas this year, but that is what we normally pick up. You can see we're in the flatlands, we're in the desert. There are mountains around us. We'll get to the mountains. Let's talk about desert life for a moment. Desert life is basically adapted to saving energy and conserving water. Plants could look dead until monsoons arrive. And then almost overnight, things just start to green up. The cactus bloom. The acacia will green up. They'll start producing leaves and the red blossoms appear. And century plants will push up their stalks. This is a greater earless lizard, a rather common species for the desert. Again, we're on the desert. We're looking up at the mountains here. Cliffs, mountains. There's a few remnant areas of homesteads in Big Bend National Park. I mentioned dugout wells closer to Rio Grande Village. That's one area. Sam Neil Ranch, which is shown here, that's another area. They still maintain some of these windmills, these old-fashioned windmills. And you can see it's kind of green here because they are still bringing water up. And there are not in this picture, but there are areas by those wells that have some decent sized trees and become critter and bird magnets. Now here's an acacia. You can see barely, showing some leaves. And within days, these blossoms come out. Desert just comes alive. So some of these areas, these like dugout wells and Sam Neil Ranch, they're still little oasis for life. And this is a great horned owl with lunch. This is just an image taken from Boquillas Canyon. A little close-up of the rock layers. So here comes some of my butterflies. And like I said, if I've got these wrong, please either unmute or just tell me later. With any sort of luck, I've gotten some of these right. Rakehurst's blue, which is a common species in the desert. It opened. Marine blue, these were super common this year. Like I said, there were not many butterflies, but probably the most common thing were the blues. This is a velvet ant. This is, I'm not sure, but I think it's a northern cloudy wing. Like I said, if I'm wrong, please correct me. And hopefully, again, I got this as hackberry emperor. There's a few images. This was one of the few species both in 2014 and this year, even with the significantly dry conditions that we did find a few of. Again, hopefully right, fatal metal mark. Ladderback woodpecker. And I said there were some extreme weather, but actually I didn't mention, but before we left, we were checking the weather and, the highs were in the, like 92, 93. I'm like, okay, that's not terrible. It's a little warm considering it was in the 30s just before we left. And it would take a little getting used to, but not terrible. We get into our campsite in Rio Grande Village the first night. And as we checked in, actually that afternoon, the lady at the desk said, oh, it's 109 degrees. The thermometer in our camper said 116, but 109, 116, hot is hot. And then there were these extreme weather conditions. We had some storms blowing in with rain and lightning, and thunder and hail. Well, we kind of missed most of that, but this was our campground a few nights later on the west side of the park. And no, it's not snowing. It's not raining. This is a sandstorm that blew up and basically obliterated any view. It would blow in and you couldn't see anything. It got worse than this. And then 5 minutes later, it was clear, and then it would start blowing again, to the point where late in the evening, the wind was pretty much gale force winds, and we actually brought in the slide out on our camper because we were rocking and we were getting a little concerned. So Big Bend can have some interesting weather challenges. Okay, so we've talked about the river, we've talked about the desert. Let's talk about the Chisos Mountains. So you can see in the upper right, Panther Valley Visitor Center. So if you continue another 3 miles to the west, there's a little spur road that will take us into the mountains. And these are the Chisos Mountains in Big Bend. They're the southernmost section of the Rocky Mountain chain. They're near the Sierra del Carmen in Mexico. It's believed that the name Chisos comes from the Apache word meaning people of the forest. And since the Apaches were probably the last people that occupied these lands prior to Anglo-Americans, that's probably the likely origin of the name. So from the main park road, the spur road takes you 6 miles up and into the mountains. The road climbs up to Green Gulch and then Panther Pass, which is the highest point of the road at 5,679 feet. And then it drops down into the basin. So you can see, what I'm talking about. It's a windy road. It says it's not recommended for RVs over 24 feet. Well, we're like maybe 25. So, and we've driven that road many times before. We knew it wouldn't be a problem. It wasn't. So we headed up there. On the east side of the road is Lost Mine Peak, which is the second highest peak in the park. It's at an elevation of 7,550 feet. And as I mentioned, to that Panther Pass, when you get to that highest point, the word panther comes up in a lot of place names and locations for Big Bend. Panthers, or mountain lions, other name that they go by, still roam these lands. So you just have to be very cognizant of that when you're hiking there. So this is the road that's going to lead you from the desert floor into the Chisos Mountains. This is as you climb into Green Gulch and get toward Panther Pass. This is when you're up at the top and you're now looking down almost just off center, just off to the left of center. You can see a little bit of a community there. That's the campground to the left. And so that's where we were heading. As we're going over to, we're passing the other, let's see, the Lost Mine Peak, which is the second highest peak in the park, 7,500 feet. Didn't mention that it was supposedly named for lost Spanish silver mine, which still hasn't been found. The most photographed peaks up here are going to be Casa Grande and Emery Peak. Emery Peak is the highest point in Big Bend at 7,825 feet. This is Casa Grande. So each of the volcanic domes on Casa Grande, Toll Mountain and Emery Peak, lie above a volcanic vent, and they're each an extinct volcano. So that's some nice late afternoon light on the area. So in the basin, you're also going to find the only hotel and restaurant in this very large park. There's also the campground, which doesn't have any services, but it's a beautiful campground to stay at, very popular. It's almost always full, especially because being up in the basin, it's cooler temperatures because of the elevation. There's a camp store, visitor center. The restaurant, due to staffing shortages, was surprisingly and unfortunately closed this year, because I remember from 7 or 8 years ago when we were there, every night we all stopped and we had their amazing cinnamon ice cream. So we're in the Chisos. The Chisos are sky islands like you would find in Southeast Arizona. There are plants and animals here that became isolated thousands of years ago after the last ice age ended. One example is the Carmen Mountains white-tailed deer, which exists only in the Chisos and the nearby Mexican mountain range. It's a smaller race of our white-tailed deer. They're just not adapted to desert habitats, and they're basically stranded in the mountains after the ice age. More common in Big Bend is the mule deer, which is found at the lower elevations, and it's able to better survive in desert conditions. So this is a Say's Phoebe, as is this. Average rainfall in the basin of the Chisos is basically double what you'd find down at Rio Grande Village near the river. And the vegetation is much more lush up here in these higher elevations. Some of the plants that you would find would include mountain mahogany, Texas madrone, there are junipers, pinyon pines, and small oaks. Some of the species found up here are reaching their southern limit. For example, Arizona pine, Arizona cypress, Douglas fir, and quaking aspen. Now, this view here is of the window, which is one of the noteworthy locations in the basin. This shot is taken from the Pinnacles Trail. So this is something we did this time. Now, mind you, even up in the basin, the temperatures were hotter than you know what. It was basically 105 degrees in the early afternoon, late morning, and we were doing 6-7 miles a day of hiking, birding, doing butterflies, insects, whatever. And you can see that meadow, that's a meadow, Texas style. It's really dry. And this is where Kallima warbler was nesting this year. We did hear them. We didn't find them, but we did hear them. So that was nice. Kallima warbler, if you don't know, it's a warbler found only in Big Bend National Park in the higher elevations in the US. It basically requires a hike of anywhere from 6 to 10 miles to get to its preferred habitat. So depending on the year, you usually find it on the Pinnacles Trail, which we did this year, or the Laguna Meadow Trail, both in the higher elevations. Both you want to make sure you start out earlier than we did this year because it's going to get hot up there. Again, you can see things are just very dry. You get into the mountains, you do get to some junipers, doesn't provide a whole lot of shade. And there was a haze. These were the days that we knew that there were going to be late afternoon storms coming in. And the views, usually the views are spectacular, but it was pretty hazy these days. There's the Carmen white-tailed deer, bit smaller than our white-tailed deer. And for comparison, here's a mule deer, which is again found at lower elevation. Big ears on the mule deer. There were some birds, not a lot, and there wasn't that much singing because we were probably about a week too late, but it did work out still. This is a Wilson's warbler, a canyon towhee, probably a brown crested flycatcher, Texas spiny lizard. And again, some of these were taken in 2014 because there wasn't a whole lot that I could say, was in bloom. I mean, There were some prickly pear cactus that had a bloom or two, and they were pretty much insect magnets. This was a number of years ago, the purple prickly pear. And I don't know if this is a dusty wing or cloudy wing. These three images, I threw them in. Hopefully someone can help me with the ID at some point, but I wanted to just show that, there was one bloom. I mean, maybe in half a mile that we were walking, this was the first cactus bloom we saw. And you could see there's insects on the top, there's insects on the right, there's insects on everyone was kind of swarming to this one lone cactus bloom. I think it's a hackberry emperor. And this is from a few years back, gray hair streak. Variegated fritillary. Oops, sorry. Second shot, same. And this was coming off, I think, the Laguna Meadows Trail a few years ago. Great purple hair streak. This poor blue gray gnatcatcher was not having a good time of it, as you can see. I've never seen such a sad looking little bird, but it posed for me, so it deserved having its picture taken. Here are the chisos at dusk. As I mentioned, there's some nice like alpenglow happening. This was taken from the lower elevations near Sam Neill Ranch. And lastly, we did the window trail. Depending on where you start on the window trail, it's about a 6-mile round trip. It's a lovely walk down, 3 miles down. First through open chaparral, as you can see. And then when you get down to the lower canyon area, you get into some oaks and maple that provide much needed shade. And the birds are fairly good. Scott's oriole, black-throated sparrow. There were some insects. Let's see. Which one? Leaf-footed bug. Okay, thank you to my husband. And a leaf beetle emerging. That was kind of neat. And a red-shouldered bug. You can see there's a lot more greenery. This was 2014. Arizona sister. Possibly, hopefully, Vesta crescent. Again, if I'm wrong, please let me know. Mexican yellows. Not a very good picture, but only one I have. Okay, golden banded skipper, something I think that's kind of found in that area. Actually, I was talking to one of the rangers this time at the visitor center who was a butterfly person, and she told me to keep my eyes out for this, but this was taken in 2014. She said they hadn't really been seeing them yet this year. This I'm not sure at all. I'm thinking it's a tropical leafwing, but I am not certain. And then again, 3 images of the same that I'm thinking is a northern cloudy wing, but again, not certain. And then some specialty birds down there. This is a Mexican jay. You find them in this part of Texas and Big Bend, and also in southeast Arizona. They have a tendency to be rather tolerant of people. So they seem to come in and check you out a bit, so you get some good photo ops. Acorn woodpeckers are rather common down there. Another prickly parrot blossom. This was about the only other plant we saw in blossom, in any kind of blossom this year in the desert. And as I mentioned, it is bear and mountain lion country, so you have to be careful. And this was taken a few years back. Bears actually made their way back into Big Bend from Mexico only between 30 and 40 years ago. So there's a very small population, but it is increasing. And so it's pretty special when you do get to see them. As are some ground squirrels, they're kind of cute, and white-winged doves. And we're going to finish with a few images from just a surrounding another area, not too far. I say not too far, it's 100 miles from Big Bend, but in Texas, and the state as big as Texas, on what's 100 miles. Now there's a few places actually when you go to the west of Big Bend National Park. You can stay in the little community of Study Butte, which we've done, and contiguous to Study Butte is the ghost town of Terlingua, which, if anyone has been there before but hasn't been there in the last half a dozen years, it's not very much of a ghost town anymore. It's been found, and people are living there, and there's 3 little restaurants, and it's not so much a ghost town. But if you head a little further west of there, there's Big Bend Ranch State Park, which I showed you early in the presentation, just west of Big Bend. And then if you go north, you get into some interesting locations. McDonald Observatory is part of the Davis Mountains, and just outside of Fort Davis is the Chihuahuan Desert Research Institute. So we wanted to go a little further north, hoping that conditions might be a little bit more bearable temperature-wise, maybe not so much. So this is the Davis Mountains. It is 100 miles north of Big Bend National Park. It's a state park. It's about 4 miles northwest of the small community of Fort Davis, which started as a military post active from 1854 to 1891. The state park is located in the Davis Mountains, which are the most extensive mountain range in Texas. And most people don't think of Texas with mountains, but you've got the Chisos, you've got the Davis, you've got Guadalupe National Park, which is due north of Davis Mountains, due north and west. Davis Mountain State Park itself is kind of located between the desert plains and grasslands and the surrounding lower elevations of the mountains that have pinyon juniper and oak woodlands. So the Davis Mountain State Park is kind of a little bit of a combination of both. So it's quite nice. The most common trees that you find there are emery and gray oak and 1C juniper. So this is a view of Davis Mountains State Park. You can see it is very arid this particular year. It's only about 2 miles up, but if you look, right in the upper left, that's where you have some of your services. The park has an interpretive center. There's a large campground that's still kept in a very natural setting, nice place to stay, good place to bird. And then a few miles up the road is a hotel that's part of the state park. It's got its own little history. CCC built that long time ago. So this little road, though, this maybe 2 mile up road, gives you this 360-degree view of the mountains and the community. Why do we go there? Oh, goodness, sorry. Well, like I said, it's a combination of the desert lowlands and the mountains. So this is taken down at the Chihuahuan Desert Research Institute, just a few miles away, and they have like a botanical area that they do water. So this is Desert Lantana, which was a magnet for the little bit of insect life that we were seeing. So we have your bumblebee there, and Chahula stink bug, if I've got that right. Another hackberry emperor that looked like it just came out. It was beautiful. That was this trip. And then the thing I like about the Davis Mountains are there's 2 wildlife blinds They have feeders set up for, the public's use. So, we just spent a week hiking in the desert, hot, hot desert. So getting to sit in a shady area and hanging out, watching the feeders and seeing what feathered and furry critters show up, that was, to me, that was just a lot of fun. So there is a water feature. So the canyon toadies were coming in. Rufous crowned sparrow was checking things out. This is a leucistic chipping sparrow that was hanging out for a while. Actually, there are two birders there that lead walks, and they were sitting with us for a while. I forget what they named this bird because this has been a regular for a month or so now, but he had a name. Black-breasted titmouse takes the place of our tufted titmouse in this area. Blue grosbeak. They didn't come in that close to the feeders, but at any given time, there were typically 4, 5, 6 of them all together on parts of the rocks or in the surrounding vegetation. Yeah, it's a pretty bird. Western tanager male. And they had feeders out. So yeah, there's some feeder shots here, but we have black-headed grosbeak on the left, and again, the male Western tanager on the right. Here was just a shot of the grosbeak. Summer tanager. Lark sparrows making more lark sparrows. White crowned sparrow, not unusual in the spring. And this was taken from a few years ago at a surrounding area to Big Bend. This was Texas whipsnake, I hope I have that right, in Christmas Oasis. And there were some bugs around, a robber fly with lunch. And this was interesting. This was out in the lowlands out by the Chihuahuan Desert Research Institute. There was a herd of desert bighorn, which was just so much fun to watch. And we're gonna finish off with not the greatest shot, but this is a little elf owl. We were so fortunate in the evenings at Davis Mountains. We would just take a walk and we'd hear the great horned owls and the common porwills calling, from the surrounding hills. But we were so lucky that there were actually several elf owls, but we had one that was not a few spots over from our campsite, and it was hunting back and forth, in our area each night. Like I said, it's not a great shot, but that's when it was just hanging out in the telephone pole and getting ready to go out for the evening. So this is also a good area for Montezuma quail, but numbers are definitely going down the last few years based on, what the locals were telling me. But all in all, it was a good trip that we had this particular year. And in past years, like I said, 7 times we've been down there. We certainly enjoy the desert. And if you like the desert, but you need that mountain fix and a little bit of everything, Big Bend's a great place to travel to because it's got a mix of habitats. It's got some amazing species, amazing scenery. And even though it's not the easiest place to get to, once you get there, you'll be happy you're there. So that concludes my presentation. So I will stop sharing. Okay.